Have you ever wondered what if Luffy had Emu's abilities before he was even born? Not a devil fruit swap, not some mysterious weapon upgrade. We're talking about Omen, Domi Reversi, and Covenants, the exact same trio that makes Emu the single most dangerous person alive in this world. The catch is brutal. Luffy doesn't even know what they do. He just gets the side effects. So our story begins. Luffy still eats the gum fruit that he finds in a box. Still dreams all day about being king of the pirates. But every time his emotions spike hard enough, something borrowed from somewhere far older than him slips out through the cracks, and nobody around him, including Luffy, understands what they just witnessed. Let's break this down. Fuchsia village looks just like it does in the original story. Luffy's underfoot, annoying, loud, constantly trying to prove he belongs on Shanks' crew. Shanks keeps turning him down with that easy grin, and Luffy keeps storming off, convinced he's one tantrum away from changing his mind. Normal kid stuff. But there's a night where Luffy gets scolded by Makino for stealing food straight off a customer's plate, and he stomps outside furious, and for exactly 1 second, 3 extra shadows stretch out from his feet across the dirt path, standing at odd angles like they belong to people who aren't there. A drunk villager walking past stumbles backward, swearing he just saw a small crowd standing behind the kid. By the time he blinks, it's just Luffy, alone, sulking. Ben Beckman happens to be smoking outside and catches the tail end of it. He doesn't say a word to Shanks that night, but he starts sitting closer to Luffy during meals after that. The mountain bandits roll into town and Haguma humiliates Shanks in front of everyone, smashing his sock bottle, calling him a coward while Shanks just sits there and takes it. Luffy loses his mind about it, screaming at Shanks to fight back. This time, one of Haguma's men, standing directly behind Luffy, suddenly grabs his own throat like something's choking him, gagging, panicking, clawing at nothing. It lasts maybe 2 seconds before he's fine again, gasping, confused, and everyone assumes he just choked on his own spit. Shanks doesn't assume that. Shanks watches that bandit very carefully for the rest of the night. The kidnapping plays out just like the original timeline. Haguma tosses Luffy into the ocean like garbage, and the Sea King comes up from underneath, ready to end this story early. Canon says Shanks dives in and pays for it with his arm. Here, right as the jaw is about to close, the Sea King suddenly jerks sideways mid-bite, like something the size of a warship just rammed into it from an angle nobody can see, and it goes tumbling through its own attack, missing entirely, disoriented and furious at an enemy it can't find. It gives up and vanishes into the deep, still confused. Shanks pulls Luffy out, both arms intact, and just holds him while he sobs. Beckman wades over. That thing didn't miss on its own. Shanks stares at his own arm for a long moment. Then, quiet enough that only Beckman hears it, "I know, and I'm still bound by it. I was hoping, somehow, today would finally break it." That single line means nothing to Beckman yet. But the way Shanks says it, like a man relieved about the wrong thing, sticks with him for years. The hat still ends up on Luffy's head before the crew sails off, just like Canon. But Shanks holds onto his wrist a beat too long while he says it, studying him like he's trying to memorize a warning label. As the ship pulls away, Beckman asks if Shanks is seriously fine leaving a kid like that completely unsupervised. Shanks doesn't look away from the shore. He's going to find out eventually. I'd rather it happen slow. A decade passes. Garp trains Luffy the only way Garp knows how, which involves a truly upsetting number of cliffs. Because Shanks kept his arm, there's no famous injury story attached to Luffy anymore, just a small, mostly ignored rumor that a Sea King once attacked something invisible near Fuchsia village and lost. Garp occasionally notices Luffy's shadow doing something it shouldn't during training, stretching wrong, moving half a second before Luffy does. But Garp's solution to literally everything is more suffering, so he doubles the training instead of asking questions. Luffy sets sail, and it starts on Alvida's ship just like the original story. He meets Kobe, who's spent years too scared to admit he wants to be a Marine. When Kobe finally says it out loud, Alvida swings her club at Luffy, who eats the hit like it's nothing because rubber. Then he gets angry on Kobe's behalf, and Alvida's own weapon suddenly looks wrong in her hands, the metal rippling like it's trying to become something with teeth, and her face twists for a heartbeat into an expression that isn't hers, hungry and wrong, before snapping back. She drops the club and backs away from her own hand like it betrayed her. Kobe doesn't understand what he just saw, but 2 days later, he notices a small, faint ring around his wrist that wasn't there before, and can't explain why looking at it makes him feel like Luffy isn't someone he should fear. Shelltown unfolds just like canon. Zoro's chained up in the yard, stubbornly starving instead of eating marine food. Luffy decides they're friends within about 4 minutes of meeting him. When Luffy storms the base to free him, Morgan orders his men to shoot Kobe and the villagers standing nearby, and every soldier in that front line suddenly can't feel their trigger fingers, like something heavy and cold has settled directly onto their hands and simply refuses to move. Helmeppo nearly faints. Zoro, still tied to his cross, watches the whole thing and quietly reconsiders exactly how strong his new captain might actually be. Morgan still falls to the axe. Zoro still joins. Later, alone, he notices the same faint ring Kobe has, now sitting on his own forearm, and decides this is a conversation for another day. Buggy hears rumors before Luffy even reaches Orangetown, something about soldiers who couldn't pull triggers even under direct orders. Buggy's sailed with Roger. He knows what real danger smells like, and this smells uncomfortably familiar. When Luffy actually shows up and Buggy grinds the straw hat under his boot out of pure spite, Luffy goes dead quiet, and the entire square feels like the temperature dropped 10 degrees in a single breath. Buggy's own reflection in a nearby shop window twists for a split second into something with a face too long and eyes too wide, gone before he can process it, and he actually stumbles backward from his own storefront glass. Moji's beast instincts scream at him to run, and he almost listens. Luffy still wins the fight just like the original timeline, loud and messy. But Buggy remembers that reflection for the rest of his life, and he never quite laughs the same way about Luffy again. Syrup Village plays out with Kuro running his usual 3-year con, patient and cold. Except his usual patience keeps unraveling around Luffy in ways he can't explain. Small irritations, wrong feelings, like something is actively working against his control without lifting a finger. Usopp still tries to warn everyone and gets laughed at until Luffy simply believes him on the spot, just like canon. During the Black Cat Pirates attack, more than one pirate swings at Usopp and somehow misses by exactly the width that should have been impossible. Blades sliding off at angles that make no physical sense, like something nudged them at the last possible second. Kuro turns on his own crew, same as the original story, and right as he does, his shadow on the ground briefly grows something jagged and wrong before it's gone, and that half second of pure horror is enough for Luffy to close the distance and end it. Kaya, days later, catches a faint circular mark on her hand in the morning light, but when she looks again, it's already gone. She quietly convinces herself it was just her imagination. At Barati, Mihawk arrives chasing down Krieg's fleet, and Zoro challenges him anyway, because Zoro has never once made a wise decision when his pride's involved. He still loses badly, just like the original timeline. That gap is real swordsmanship, and nothing riding shotgun in Luffy's blood closes a gap like that. But when Zoro refuses to stay down, several faint, human-shaped outlines flicker into place around him for exactly one frame, like an honor guard that showed up uninvited, gone before Mihawk's blade even finishes moving. Mihawk's eyebrow lifts, just slightly. He's felt real Conqueror's hockey more times than he can count. Whatever that was, it wasn't that. Before he leaves, he tells Luffy something different than canon. "Careful, boy. There's something about you that doesn't belong. Someday you'll understand what I mean." Luffy has absolutely no idea what that means, and goes back to worrying about Zoro's bleeding instead. Krieg's exhausted men start seeing things too during the final push. Translucent shapes at the edges of their vision that make an already outnumbered fight feel completely hopeless, and they break faster than Krieg can scream at them to hold the line. Sanji watches an entire fleet's morale collapse from something that isn't technically even attacking anyone, and that's enough to convince him this Straw Hat Kid is worth following, just like the original story. Arlong Park is where all three abilities finally show their teeth at once. Arlong rules through fear dressed up as a business arrangement, and Luffy still waits for Nami to actually ask him for help before doing anything, because some things about Luffy never change no matter what's tangled up inside him. When she finally breaks and asks, just like canon, Luffy sets his hat on her head, and a faint mark briefly blooms on her wrist before fading away, though nobody notices with everything else going on. The walk into Arlong Park feels wrong before they even arrive, fishmen abandoning their posts early like they're fleeing something they can't name. Arlong laughs off the warning until Luffy actually steps through the gate, and then he stops laughing entirely. During the fight, badly hurt, furious, cornered, Luffy's shadow stretches up the wall behind him into something with horns and too many joints for exactly one instant, and Arlong, mid-swing, freezes just long enough to lose the fight because of it. Luffy wins, Nami's free, just like the original timeline, and every fishman who saw that shadow spends the rest of their life insisting they didn't imagine it, even though nobody believes them. Before Logtown, quick reminder to like the video and subscribe if this is your kind of thing. With Arlong down, the crew heads toward the place where Goldie Roger died, and Luffy's bounty is already climbing higher than it should be for someone who hasn't even left East Blue. The execution platform scene plays out just like canon, Buggy holding the blade, lightning about to solve everyone's problems for them. Right before it strikes, Luffy laughs at the absurdity of the whole situation, and for one flickering second, the crowd nearest him swears they're suddenly standing shoulder to shoulder with people who weren't there 30 seconds ago, an impossible crush of bodies that vanishes as fast as it appeared. Buggy nearly drops the sword from pure confusion. Lightning hits. Luffy survives, just like the original story, and Logtown gets a strange new footnote added to its legend. Smoker starts hunting him with a different kind of urgency after that. Dragon shows up and calls off the chase, just like Cannon, but even Dragon lingers a moment too long in that square, catching something in the air that feels distantly, uncomfortably familiar to presences he's felt before and never talks about. He leaves Logtown with a much heavier question than he arrived with. By the time the crew reaches the Grand Line, things have quietly shifted for everyone aboard. Zoro's noticed the strange flicker on his arm gets stronger the longer he stays close to Luffy and has decided not to mention it. Nami touches her wrist sometimes without realizing she's doing it. Usopp stopped trying to explain away every strange flicker at the edge of a fight, and Luffy still doesn't understand a single piece of what's happening to him. Not the shapes, not the marks, not the way certain enemies briefly stop looking human right before they lose. He just knows something old answers whenever the people he cares about are in real danger, and that answer is getting louder every single time, which means every serious threat waiting for him from here on has to reckon with a version of Luffy that isn't just unpredictable, he's quietly carrying pieces of something the entire world government has spent generations trying to keep locked away. So that's the setup. Shanks keeps both arms, but never loses the uneasy feeling of a covenant that should have broken and didn't. Buggy figures out something's deeply wrong with this kid 2 arcs before almost anyone else does. Arlong Park becomes the first place Domi Reversi actually shows its face, even if only for a heartbeat, and by the time Luffy crosses into the Grand Line, Zoro and Nami are quietly carrying strange signs that none of them can explain, tied to a captain who still just wants to be king of the pirates, completely unaware he's carrying fragments of a power connected to the one person in this world that even the 5 elders answer to. Reverse Mountain is where the Straw Hats finally enter the Grand Line, and for the first time, Luffy's strange powers react to something that isn't an enemy. The Going Merry makes it up the impossible current before the crew is suddenly swallowed by Laboon, the giant whale waiting at the entrance. Luffy meets Crocus inside while Mr. 9 and Miss Wednesday are still trying to kill Laboon for food. Luffy stops them, and the fight plays out close to Cannon, but when Luffy gets angry after learning why Laboon has been waiting there for so many years, several faint human-shaped shadows briefly appear across the whale's body, moving in different directions, despite Luffy standing completely still. Crocus sees them, Luffy doesn't. When Luffy promises to return and finish their fight with Laboon someday, Crocus gives the crew a log pose and watches them sail toward the Grand Line. He doesn't mention what he saw, but that strange moment gives him another reason to remember this particular pirate crew. Whiskey Peak starts almost exactly like Cannon, with the Straw Hats arriving at a town that looks welcoming on the surface but is secretly filled with Baroque Works agents. Luffy and the crew celebrate with everyone, completely unaware that almost the entire town is waiting for them to fall asleep. But Zoro notices something wrong before anyone else does. The same strange feeling he's been getting around Luffy becoming stronger the longer he stays near him. Once the agents finally attack, Zoro takes them on alone and cuts through them before they can overwhelm the crew. Luffy wakes up in the middle of it and, completely misunderstanding what he's seeing, assumes Zoro is attacking their new friends. The two still clash just like Cannon, but every time Luffy gets genuinely angry, the shadows around him briefly shift in directions they shouldn't, making Zoro's attacks miss by inches even when Zoro isn't aiming at him. Before they can finish, Nami forces them to stop and Vivi's identity is finally revealed. She explains that she's the princess of Alabasta and that Baroque Works is planning to destroy her kingdom. Luffy still decides to help her without hesitation, and as the crew leaves Whiskey Peak, the faint mark on Vivi's wrist appears for the first time, though she hides it beneath her glove without understanding why it's there. Little Garden begins with the Straw Hats reaching the prehistoric island where 2 giants, Dory and Brogy, have been fighting each other for 100 years. Luffy immediately becomes fascinated by them, while Vivi learns that Baroque Works has followed them there. Mr. 3 and the other agents set their trap, using wax to capture the Straw Hats and turning the island itself into a death sentence. When Luffy realizes his friends are being slowly trapped, something inside him reacts before he can. The wax around his hands suddenly develops cracks shaped like tiny fingers, as if something on the other side is trying to pull him free. Mr. 3 sees it and freezes, but the effect disappears before Luffy even understands what happened. The fight continues close to Cannon, with Luffy eventually breaking free and defeating Mr. 3 while Dory and Brogy finish their battle. But when the giants finally recognize the Straw Hats as people worthy of their respect, several faint silhouettes briefly appear behind Luffy, standing like silent witnesses to the moment. Vivi notices them this time, but when she looks again, they're gone. The crew leaves Little Garden with the log pose set for their next destination, unaware that Baroque Works has already placed a target on their backs. Drum Island begins with Nami suddenly falling seriously ill, forcing the Straw Hats to find a doctor before her condition gets worse. The crew reaches the Frozen Kingdom and learns that Wapol has returned, but the only doctor capable of helping Nami is the strange old woman living at the top of Drum Mountain. Luffy still carries Nami up the mountain despite the freezing cold, while Sanji follows behind him and Vivi tries to keep up. Along the way, Luffy's strange power reacts to Nami's condition for the first time without any anger or fighting involved. His shadow briefly stretches across the snow toward her, and several faint shapes appear around her body like they're standing guard. Luffy doesn't notice, but Vivi does, and she starts wondering if whatever is connected to Luffy isn't only reacting to his enemies. At the castle, Wapol attacks just like Cannon, and Luffy sends him flying after learning what he did to the kingdom. Kuriha saves Nami, while Chopper finally decides to leave the island and join Luffy's crew. But as Chopper takes his first steps away from Drum Island, he looks back and notices a faint circular mark appear on his hoof for less than a second before disappearing. He doesn't understand it, and neither does Luffy. The crew leaves with their new doctor, heading straight toward Alabasta, unaware that Crocodile and Baroque Works are already preparing for their arrival. Alabasta begins with the Straw Hats reaching Nanohana, where Vivi sees how badly Crocodile's plan has divided her kingdom. Ace reunites with Luffy before leaving to continue his own journey, while the crew eventually reaches Rain Base and gets trapped inside Crocodile's casino. They escape after Crocodile reveals himself as Mr. Zero and explains his plan to take over Alabasta. As they rush toward Alubarna, Crocodile intercepts Vivi and tries to take her away, but Luffy stays behind and challenges him alone. The fight starts just like Cannon, with Crocodile completely dominating Luffy through his sand fruit and the desert itself. But when Crocodile goes for the finishing blow, Luffy's emotions trigger something that has been buried inside him since childhood. His haki suddenly erupts with a pressure so unnatural that even Crocodile freezes for a moment, while black omen flames crawl across Luffy's arm and coil around his fist. Luffy doesn't understand what he's using, but when he throws the punch, the omen tears through Crocodile's sand form and actually sends him flying. Crocodile realizes that this isn't normal haki, and for the first time he has no idea what kind of power he's dealing with. Luffy keeps pressing forward, forcing Crocodile to abandon the fight rather than risk letting this unknown power develop any further. Crocodile escapes, but the Straw Hats continue toward Alubarna as the rebellion reaches its breaking point. The crew splits up to stop Baroque Works while Vivi desperately tries to end the war, and Luffy eventually confronts Crocodile again. This time, Crocodile pushes him even harder, but Luffy's strange haki and omen react together whenever he's pushed to the edge, allowing him to finally overpower the warlord and defeat him. With Crocodile down, Baroque Works collapses, the civil war ends, and Alabasta is saved. Robin then joins the Straw Hats just like Cannon, while Luffy still has absolutely no idea that the power he used to defeat Crocodile is connected to the same force that even the highest authorities of the world government fear.